Hi there, Chair. Thank you very much for that second welcome.
Good to have you back.
I'm going to share my screen, Chair, if you don't mind. There's a presentation that I'm going to give. I just want to make sure that everyone can see it. If you can maybe just confirm it while I am on presentation mode.
John, we can see your presentation. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I think I love your introduction. So when we look at digital infrastructure for a digital Africa, Gartner tells us that we need to look at acquiring automation skills. They talk about those predictions in terms of the path to digital infrastructure around the biggest inhibitor to infrastructure automation, is the skills. From a growth perspective, your workload and portfolio and your placement will be an inhibitor. From expanding your efficiency and visibility, those things will lead to address some of the challenges that you have with infrastructure automation. And infrastructure on demand, so because we've been talking a lot about cloud in this particular platform, making infrastructure on demand, the increase of that and the costs associated with that are sometimes one of the inhibitors as far as Gartner is concerned around digital infrastructure. But let me tell you what I believe that we need to look at. So whether you're in a government department or whether you're in a private sector environment, when you're looking at creating a digital infrastructure for digital Africa, you start with baby steps. The first thing you try to do is to establish a centralized ICT shared services so you can provide a common platform of services to your business or to your government entity. The second level of maturity that you want to get to is the integration of all your enterprise systems and creating an intelligent integrated operation center from which all those is operated from. The third one now starts moving a bit away from the technology component and reaching into the information level where you now need to start to establish an enterprise ICT competency center, one of them which we typically call your BICCs or application as a service, infrastructure as a service, and all those competency environments that you need to have. Now, the final journey for you is to then, if you're in a metro like ourselves, you create a metro-wide center of excellence for all the services. Because once you start having a center of excellence for services, it becomes easier for you to make decisions around how you need to transform. Now, what drives this is you find that we have a government-wide enterprise architecture framework in South Africa, which is commonly referred to as GWIA. And what GWIA tells us about digital infrastructure is that the first thing from an objective perspective is you need to create alignment. There must be alignment with your ICT roadmap, as well as your strategic plans of the organization. You must drive transformation, and that must focus on optimizing, innovating your business processes and services, and you must try to maximize your business value, while the ugly word in IT is you need to minimize your IT spend. And I know when we buy technology, we spend more, but in this instance, we are saying what you need to buy must also help you to redress some of the excessive costs that are associated with modern ICT. And I'm not talking about the costs associated to transforming and bringing it up to a level of maturity. So one of the focus areas around alignment, you look at things like modernization, realigning your IT strategy, and then talking about an IT sourcing strategy. And this is very critical because you can go on a digital infrastructure campaign, but if your sourcing strategy as to what you're buying, are you insourcing, co-sourcing, are you outsourcing? What is your sourcing strategy? Because that will drive what type of procurement you're going to do. But from an architecture perspective, you need to review your architecture and say, is this digital ready? And if not, what is it that we need to do? So from a customer and a citizen perspective, in terms of service delivery, you need to look at how that does, underpinned by governance and compliance. And I'm not going to go through the entire slide, but what you'll see is that the transform talks about integrate, innovate, performance, single view, and those are things that have come through to the themes that we spoke about earlier. And we also look at what underpins that. Is your business architecture? Is your application architecture where all your policies and your performance models and your reference models that talks to the information will help you to build that digital infrastructure. Now, for you to build an ecosystem for digitization, some of the digital insights you need to consider is the issues around your strategy. Does your organization's strategy drive a digital agenda. If it doesn't drive a digital agenda, all you're going to have is a CIO with an ICT strategy driving a digital agenda that is not supported by the business strategy. So resourcing and funding will always become a crisis. The second digital insight is around data. Make sure people understand who the owners of data is, how do you extract, transform, and load, how intelligence is created, and what those business rules are, and make sure those things are defined up front. Organizational alignment for that ecosystem is important, because if you don't have the right sponsors or the right people that understand what the race is around digitization, you're going to get confusion in terms of the roles and what they play. Analytics in AI can only work if you have an underpinning infrastructure and data layer that will allow you to extract information, apply business rules to it, to get specific outcomes that's going to help the business achieve either a strategic, tactical, or operational objectives. Customer experience is very important, because if your customer is not going to join you on your digital journey, it doesn't matter what you do from a digital perspective. They're just not going to adopt this, and all your expenditure in that is going to become a problem. Now, from an innovation perspective, innovate on what is your top priority. Don't innovate for the sake of innovation. And people and culture, as we always say, is the critical things, because those things are going to help you drive your connected system on your digital ecosystem, which touches things like your technology, touches things like the different channels you're going to use to supply your services with, and also how the realignment will happen as far as your strategy is concerned. Now, when you're looking at the need for digital upskilling, or how your organization is going to scale through this, presented by the digital solution, you'll find that at the roof of your house, you're going to have services. Your services are going to be underpinned by four strategic pillars that talks about how you turn your enterprise smart, how do you create a single view of your customer, how do you create centricity around your services, how you deal with performance management around it, and internally in the organization, how does those shared services get supported? And from a technology perspective, how do you create an integrated enterprise? Now, what is important to understand is that when you need to mobilize your organization, the strategic objectives needs to talk about digital. Your cloud architects need to understand what the priorities of the business is. Your center of excellence needs to be broken down into service components, and I'll speak to that later. Your decision-making frameworks must be clearly defined and policies clearly spelled out, so that when somebody comes and brings us automated signatory solution, that when somebody signs it, it actually can be treated as a legal document. And then what are the best practices you're going to adopt, and how you're going to plan the exploitation development of your skills. Now, when you need to do that upskilling, I'm also a member of the Institute of Chartered IT Professionals, and through the Chartered CIO Council, of which I'm the chair in the country, we're driving a digital developmental agenda, but also driving a code of conduct that is going to make sure that development of ICT skills are not just going to be for what we need to deliver from a technology perspective, but also to make sure that they have that constant learning, they have a code of conduct they apply to, that they can subscribe to, they have the ability to be able to develop themselves and have a dual development growth area. Because previously, you either become a manager or a director to grow in salary or to grow in responsibilities. But now there's going to be an equivalent growth sector around the professionalization of the skills. So I was fortunate enough to be one of the first certified chartered CIOs in the country, which in the accounting sector is an equivalent for a CA. And this is where we have a growth party, and that a chartered CIO status is the equivalent of having a master's degree. So I think now we're really making sure that from a digital perspective, we can develop the skills and we can give them the necessary rewards and recognition, and also implement continuous learning in them. So when you have to look at the structure on the right that supports your digital agenda, whether it be from your GCTO, your technical group technical operations officer, or your service management teams, or the different forums you need to participate in, or the operations you need to deliver in terms of infrastructure or platform, or your NOC or your SOC, or your end user computing, those skills are then going to be specific, and they're going to be what you need. You can then make the decision around procurement. And that's why your sourcing strategy I referred to earlier is very important. Because do you actually going to go and buy the skills? Are you going to hire the skills? Are you going to develop the skills? Or are you saying that I'm going to procure those skills as a service, and as I transform my business, I won't need them anymore? Now, when you have to start moving your ICT component towards a driven economy, there are a couple of things from a strategic alignment perspective you need to consider. How are you going to improve your strategic planning around ICT? Are you going to participate in things like green ITC, etc., where you can look at environmental credits and so on? How are you going to do business engagement, your technology architecture, your research, and your investments? Because ICT is an investment, and it needs to be managed as both an investment and a portfolio. And when you start looking at the economy around that, you need to consider what the value delivery elements are going to be, what risks you're going to have to manage, and how you're going to then deal with your assets, your people, and the financial components. And when you look under the people and the assets, on the bottom left-hand side of the circle, you see there's strategic sourcing and vendor management. You see service management, application development, and human capital. So these are the things that are important, because if you say I'm going to deliver through SMMEs, then you need to establish the economy by which they can not only participate in it, but also develop their own growth and making sure that you ready them for their future. Now, I think when you look at the IT-driven economy, what we have done is we have adopted the SIAM framework, which says to us and gave us the capabilities of actually breaking up the entire ICT function of the city of Johannesburg into key services. Those services then allow us to have service integrators that can deal with service management, vendors, transformation programs, and risks. But what is important is at the bottom is where those service towers then provides us the opportunity to either then break down those services, either from an insourcing and outsourcing perspective, but also to deal with the economic requirements for each one of those. So when we have to make financial or fiscal decisions, we can actually make it per service, and it gives us the flexibility to insource, outsource, or co-source. And I think those are some of the considerations we need to have when moving towards an ICT-driven economy. And that is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much, Chair. I have tried not to bore you guys too much with too much presentation, but I think my closing argument for you is as follows. Building a digital economy will only be successful if the four things happen. Your customers adopt digital as a way of doing business with you. So uptake is key as a measurement. The second one is that both your skills, internal and external, and your partners are developed and aligned to ensure that they are able to not only build and develop, but also implement and sustain those skills. The third one, in terms of economy, is decide how are you going to break up the cake, and how are you going to develop future service providers to also lessen your dependency on the big blue firms from a service perspective. And if you're going to do that, you need to decide from a sourcing perspective, how much of your procurement cake are you going to allocate to SMMEs to help them grow to become the future service providers of tomorrow, so that you can also localize those services and make sure by localizing them, you're developing the communities in which your economies thrive. The final thing around the economy is about the money. There needs to be a concerted effort from both an executive and board level perspective that there is an investment that is going to be done from an ICT perspective. And if you are fortunate enough to have a very large IT contingent, you can then also look at considering how you provide your ICT function as a service that you can then outsource to other people in the same business sector as you, and create synergies around it, but also use it as a way of generating revenue. And by doing that, you create standardization in systems and making sure that between the partners and yourselves, you guys are operating a lot better and more effectively. I thank you once again humbly for this opportunity to have given this keynote address, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be here today. Thank you very much, Chair. Over to you.